on AM 560 The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Bam, bam.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The illegal student loan forgiveness, the euphemism that's used to describe the Biden administration's socialization of other people's debt onto people who did not agree to incur it, that, I think, is going to come to an end when Trump assumes office on January 20th. The question is, will there be more structural reforms of college education funding, both in terms of what colleges get from the federal government, as well as perhaps getting the federal government out of the student loan program altogether and sending it back to private lenders to evaluate borrowers' ability to pay, which would probably lower tuition, among other things, in terms of revising admissions and programs offerings as well. So perhaps there's going to be some significant structural changes. Perhaps it will just be the end of the socialization of student loan debt. For more on this changing landscape, pleased to be joined by Ray Kaplan. We've spoken with her before. Oh, yeah. Ray Kaplan is an attorney at Kaplan Law. You can visit Kaplan Law at financialrelief.com, or call 312-294-8989. Ray Kaplan, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hi, guys. Nice to be with you again.
So, let's start with the student loan forgiveness, the unconstitutional student loan forgiveness that persisted regardless of what the Supreme Court said. What happens, do you think, to those people who've had their student loans socialized illegally?
Well, okay, so you mean people who have already had their loans forgiven under one of the provisions of the statute?
Right. So, is there the possibility, because I'm sure some are worried about clawback?
Yes, I don't think that that's in any way a possibility, because the good thing about that for people who've already had their loans forgiven is that the wording for their ability to take part in loan forgiveness, let's say under public service loan forgiveness or one of the other forgiveness provisions, is written into their promissory notes. So even if they change the law, which would be very difficult because I don't think it would be that politically popular, just my own opinion, but they would need a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, and there doesn't seem to be the political will to do that kind of thing. So I think that even if the law changed, let's say they were able to get the support for that, it would likely only apply to future borrowers. Right. So people who've already had their loans forgiven are likely in good shape, and those aren't coming back anytime soon.
And we're going to have to pay for it. All right, so what about
that's a done deal.
It doesn't really work that way.
Okay, then tell me how it works.
So basically the way it works is that you have to remember a lot of people who are paying on these loans are paying for years and years, and they actually paid back the amount that was borrowed plus some level of interest. What happens is that they get involved in these long-term payment plans because the servicers advise them incorrectly, and so the balance accrues interest for 20, 25 years, and then they switch a payment plan, and that process starts over again with capitalizing interest. So the federal government makes a lot of money on these federal student loans. I'm not saying there's not room for improvement. There certainly is, but it's not as though now we, the taxpayers, are going to have to pay somebody's loans that have been forgiven. It's just debt that the government would write off, much as if a business would write off debt that, if they just can't collect it, or they've written that provision into a statute and that borrower is entitled to forgiveness, then they get the loans forgiven. But in most cases, the borrowers actually do pay back either the entire amount plus interest or even more than that in many cases.
Yeah.
It's a lot of interest being forgiven. I will tell you that. For sure.
Right. And the problem is, of course, the people that did pay in full without any sort of relief from the federal government are are essentially under a different legal regime. And so this just the whole business, here we go again, of government picking winners and losers. You have to pay back exactly what you committed to on the dotted line, and other people don't. And whatever the infirmity of the advice or the judgment they got, they still signed on the dotted line. And so, it just smacks of unfairness. But I guess my question would be, too, thinking about this going forward, what about the idea of getting the federal government to the point of the arbitrariness of these forgiveness programs and just the general arbitrariness of government as a function of being government? What about getting the federal government out of the student loan business and putting it back to private lenders and let them make decisions about creditworthiness and terms and so forth? What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think it's the best idea, because there are laws under the Higher Education Act where essentially it would be very, very difficult. Again, you would need a filibuster-proof majority to get a change in legislation like that through, where the government is no longer issuing federal student loans on any level, and it just goes back to private lenders. And with private lenders, very often there's no flexibility in terms of the terms of the contract, and the interest is generally much higher than it is on federal student loans, and with less ability to have income-driven payment plans or some type of loan forgiveness. So I think that might create some problems. But I do take your point that it also might have the added benefit of lowering
reducing the
tuition
principal.
costs.
Yeah, reducing the principal. And I mean, it's like one of those things, too. We just sort of accept what is under the belief that it's always been. And in point of fact, the government didn't take over the student loan business, it didn't back student loans until like 1965. And a lot of people went to college before then. So
Right.
it didn't.
And the
It
cost
wasn't
was much less.
right.
Oh, yeah.
So
More, yeah.
I don't
it
know
was
how
so it
people do
wasn't always this way. And if you do a little comparison contrast, as you're sort of just referencing, one could argue it made a lot more sense. And frankly, private transactions usually do as compared to the public ones.
Well, I think there's also a lot of fear mongering right now going on with the media in terms of what Trump is going to do. And he's talking about eliminating the Department of Education. What he's really talking about there is kind of the top-down federalization of education. And I think what he's talking about is eliminating these kind of CRT programs and maybe unpopular social issues that are being mandated by the federal government in order for states to get money for their public schools. And so I think he wants states to have more control over their own curriculum, which makes perfect sense, to have it more localized, but to still keep intact the ability for borrowers, once they are looking at college, to be able to borrow federal student loans, or for their parents to be able to borrow federal Parent Plus loans. I don't think that Trump, I don't recall him ever discussing getting rid of federal student loan programs. But when he says, we want to get rid of the Department of Ed, I think a lot of people read things into that he doesn't really mean, and nobody's even really talking about. So I just want people to not panic, because I do truly 100% believe that federal student loans will always be available for college and for parents who need to send their kids to college and are looking for a way to finance it. But they may tinker around the edges and change the statutes. But the statutes that are in place under the Higher Education Act are great, because it allows students to borrow in a limited way, because students have no credit, right? They're 18 years old. But it allows parents of students to borrow much more liberally and then be on the hook for payments for 25 years. And so it's actually a pretty good system. You kind of just have to know how to navigate it. And that's really where we come into play. And we help students apply for scholarships, because that makes a big difference. There's a lot of money out there that people just don't know about and are afraid to ask for.
People have no clue how many scholarships are out there. Just apply for all of them and see what you get.
What about
there are great search engines too for it.
Okay, search engines. Do you have recommendations?
Yes, so there's one actually called Scholarship Owl, like the bird, scholarshipowl.com, and they curate all of the different scholarships and help you reapply each year for recurring scholarships. And that sometimes can be $10,000, even more, $20,000 per year. A lot of schools will give you $20,000 a year if you keep your GPA above 3.4 or 3.5. And that makes a huge difference. If your tuition's $30,000 and you get a $20,000 scholarship, then that means less that you have to borrow in your own student loans and less that your parents would have to borrow for student loans as well.
Are you seeing more development of income share arrangements like Mitch Daniels started at Purdue to reduce the debt burden coming out of college?
I'm not really familiar with those, so I can't speak to those. No.
This is where you put like private actors and somebody to connect college graduates in their particular discipline to actual practitioners in the space, and so you have private sponsors that essentially come in and provide the scholarship money, and then you repay that back on a schedule based on the income you earn coming out of college as you go to work for that individual or for that business or in that sector.
Oh, yeah, that sounds like a fantastic idea. Anything like that where I think there's more accountability and more transparency. I would say the biggest problem with the way the system is set up right now is that there's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of misinformation about federal student loans, and the Department of Ed and the servicers have not done a great job in servicing these loans and telling borrowers what they're eligible for. Basically, the servicers just want to keep the borrowers out of default. So very often they would just put them into forbearance. Interest continues to accrue, and the borrowers think that the servicers know what they're talking about, right, as they should. But very often, I've been on the phone with servicers before after being on hold for 2 hours. They drop the call, and then I call back, and then they tell you something that's wildly inaccurate about your monthly payment or your ability to apply for a certain type of loan forgiveness. The public service loan forgiveness is a section of the statute that was signed into law by George W. Bush in 2007. So these are provisions that are established and really help borrowers like doctors, nurses, public school teachers, police officers, et cetera, be able to finance their kids' college education and make monthly payments that are reasonable based on their income and potentially get a lot of the loan forgiven. But the idea is that Congress, and at that time George Bush, wanted to promote people working or who took jobs in the public sector, like, military, police officers, that kind of, those kinds of jobs.
She is Ray Kaplan, Kaplan Law Firm, as you could tell. She is an expert on all things student loan related. You can visit Kaplan Law Firm at financialrelief.com. Financialrelief.com is the website for Kaplan Law Firm. Or you can call 312-294-8989. 312-294-8989. Ray Kaplan, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Yep, thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The new administration has hinted at one of its boldest moves yet, America's return to the gold standard. Backing the U.S. dollar with gold would create stability in a time of rapid economic change, pushing the price of gold higher than we've seen in decades. Those who act now could be positioned to benefit the most. Premier Gold specializes in helping those with a 401k, IRA, or other types of retirement account